Okay, so you want to own a medieval toll bridge. A stone span across a river, a gatehouse at one end, a man with a ledger and a strongbox, and a queue of carts stretching back down the road every single morning. And on paper, this is the best business idea in the entire medieval economy. Think about what you're selling, and who's doing the selling for you. Every merchant moving wool to the coast, every drover pushing cattle to market, every pilgrim, every cart, every pack horse, all of them arrive at the same riverbank and face the same choice: pay you a small toll or get wet. The river is your salesman. It works day and night, never takes a wage, and it makes the same closing argument to every customer who has ever lived. That water is cold, that current is strong, and your goods don't float. You stand at the bridgehead on a market morning, counting carts, a coin or two from each one, and you think, this isn't a business. This is a tax on geography, and I own the geography. Here's the problem. The river that makes your bridge valuable spends every day of its existence trying to destroy it. Every flood leans on your piers. Every winter sends ice downstream at your arches. Every spring thaw digs at your foundations, underwater, where you cannot see the damage until the day it becomes catastrophic. The salesman standing at your gate charming the customers is the same partner quietly eating the building. And medieval England understood this so thoroughly that it reached a conclusion which sounds insane until you've heard the numbers. The best toll position in the economy should not be owned by a businessman at all. The greatest bridges of the age ended up in the hands of the church, of charitable trusts, of brotherhoods sworn to poverty, funded by dying men's wills and the fear of hell. So why did the one asset that looks most like a money printer end up structured as a charity? By the end of this video, you'll see that the medieval answer was not superstition. It was, on the evidence available, correct. First, the money, in 2 sentences. English money runs 12 pence to a shilling and 20 shillings to a pound, and a skilled mason in the 14th century earned about 4 pence a day, so a pound is roughly 2 months of a mason's labor. Translate every figure in this video into that, because that's what it meant. Now, there isn't one crossing business. There are several, and they compete with each other, which is a fact your business plan cannot afford to forget. At the bottom sits the ford, a shallow place where the river can be walked. It costs nothing to build, nothing to maintain, and nothing to use, which makes it the most dangerous competitor in this story, because a free competitor sets a ceiling on your price forever. In dry summers, the ford 2 miles upstream is open for business, and its toll is 0. Above the ford, the ferry, 1 boat, 1 boatman, a small toll. Cheap to start, miserable in bad weather, capacity of a rowing boat. It skims your customers on fair days and vanishes on foul ones. Then the timber bridge, quick to build, quick to rot, quick to burn, and quick to wash away. Most bridges in the medieval world were timber, and their owners lived on a treadmill of piecemeal repair. And then the thing you're dreaming of, the stone bridge, permanent, prestigious, tollable, except stone doesn't remove the treadmill. It just raises the stakes on it, as we're about to see. And at the very top, one more category, the inhabited bridge. A bridge carrying not just a road, but a street, with shops and houses built along both sides. Hold that one in your mind. It looks like a decoration. It turns out to be the answer to the entire riddle of this video. Each of these is a different bet on the same underlying question. Are you selling a crossing, or are you renting out the absence of a wet one? Because the customer doesn't want your bridge. The customer wants the other bank, and every cheaper way of reaching it comes straight out of your revenue. Right, let's build the thing. And here is where the fantasy takes its first serious damage. The expensive part of a bridge is the part nobody will ever see. It's underwater. An arch is easy. Masons had built arches for 1,000 years. What's hard is giving that arch something to stand on in the middle of a moving river, and doing it before modern machinery, which meant doing it roughly like this. At low water, men drove rings of timber piles into the riverbed. Sharpened tree trunks, hammered down by hand from rafts and platforms, to enclose a patch of riverbed. At Avignon, they used whole oak trunks up to a meter thick, sharpened like giant pencils. Inside that enclosure, the water was baled, or the space simply filled with rubble and mortar until a platform rose above the waterline. And on that drowned platform, and only then, the visible bridge began. Every one of those foundations was built in a fight against current, tide, and season. The work could happen only in the low water months. A wet year didn't delay a bridge by weeks. It deleted an entire building season. Now scale that by the number of piers. Old London Bridge stood on 19 piers across a tidal Thames that was then over 900 feet wide, wider than it is today, with a tidal current strong enough to be dangerous. A priest named Peter de Colchurch began that bridge in 1176. It was finished in 1209. 33 years. Peter himself died 4 years before completion and was buried in the chapel on his own unfinished bridge. Historians who study the project put its scale plainly. Building it was an undertaking on a par with a castle or a cathedral. Sit with that comparison, because it prices the fantasy. To enter the toll business at the top level, you need cathedral money and a builder prepared to spend his entire remaining life on the project. And when it's done, the 33 years of capital is standing in the one place on Earth specifically designed by nature to demolish it. And there's a twist inside the engineering that deserves its own moment, because it's the purest example in this whole story of the bridge and the river locked together to protect those 19 underwater platforms from the current. The builders of London Bridge wrapped each one in a broad apron of piles and rubble, boat-shaped islands called starlings. Sensible, except add up the width of 19 starlings across a 900-foot river, and you discover that the bridge's own defenses had blocked the majority of the channel. The Thames, which had flowed wide and lazy, was now forced to squeeze its entire volume through a row of narrow gaps. Squeezed water accelerates. The gentle river turned into a line of rapids under the arches, with the water level on one side of the bridge sometimes standing feet higher than on the other, like a weir. Boatmen called the passage "shooting the bridge," and it earned the name because people drowned doing it regularly for centuries. There was a saying in London that the bridge was for wise men to go over and fools to go under. Now follow the loop all the way round. Faster water digs harder at foundations. So the scour at the starlings got worse, which meant more piles and more rubble to protect them, which narrowed the channel further, which accelerated the current again. The bridge's defenses were manufacturing the very force they defended against. For 600 years, London Bridge was in an arms race with a river that the bridge itself had armed. That is what it means to own infrastructure standing in moving water. Your maintenance doesn't just fight the enemy. Done wrong, it feeds him. So far, so good. Now let's talk about the revenue, because you're expecting a monopoly, and what you're actually getting is a price ceiling with a queue in front of it. Your toll is capped 3 ways, and none of them care about your costs. First, the ford and the ferry. Price the crossing above the pain of getting wet. And in July, your customers walk the river 2 miles upstream and wave at you. Your toll can never exceed the inconvenience of your cheapest competitor, and your cheapest competitor charges nothing. Second, the exemptions. Medieval tolls came wrapped in privilege. Clergy commonly crossed free. Local men of the town frequently crossed free by charter. The king's business crossed free. Great lords negotiated free passage or simply took it. Strip out everyone with a privilege, and your paying customers are a fraction of the traffic on your bridge, and they are precisely the strangers with the least loyalty and the most willingness to use the ford. And third, the cap nobody warns you about: politics. A toll is the most visible price in the district, collected in coin, in public, at a gate, from everyone. Raise it, and you don't just lose customers. You breed resentment with a fixed address. Toll gates get burned in this period. Collectors get beaten. When the king's bailiff at Rochester seized a horse and 5 cows from tenants over bridge dues in 1311, the tenants came and took their animals back, and the record notes, with medieval brevity, that they beat the bailiff. Your revenue instrument doubles as a grievance, and everyone knows where it lives. But all of that is the small problem. Here's the large one, and it's the fact around which this entire industry was forced to organize. The toll ends. The bridge doesn't. In England, the right to charge for a crossing very often arrived as something called pontage, a royal license, issued by letters patent, to collect a toll for a fixed term, for the specific purpose of building or repairing a bridge. 3 years, 5 years, occasionally more. When Lancaster's bridge needed repair in 1291, the Earl received pontage for 5 years. Then it expired. The Crown kept a whole catalogue of these grants, and historians have counted them, decade by decade, from the 1220s onward. Understand what that instrument really is. It is not ownership of a toll. It is a loan of a toll, term limited, purpose limited, renewable only at the king's pleasure. The income has an expiry date printed on it. The liability, the stone standing in the river, has none. Which raises the question this whole video turns on. When the pontage runs out and the next flood comes, who is legally obliged to pay? And here medieval England gives an answer so strange, it's worth reading slowly. Very often, nobody. Anglo-Saxon England had treated bridge work as one of the great common burdens, alongside fortress work and army service, duties that attached to land itself. But by the High Middle Ages, that system had decayed into a patchwork of ancient, contested, half-remembered obligations. Magna Carta itself contains a clause on the subject, promising that no village and no man shall be compelled to build bridges except those bound to do so from of old. Read that as a lawyer. It means the class of people who can be forced to maintain bridges is closed. If your ancestors weren't anciently liable, you cannot be made liable now. The kingdom's bridge repair capacity was legally frozen, centuries deep, and shrinking. So when a bridge failed, the Crown's first move was an inquest. Send jurors to ask the ancient question, who is bound, from time out of mind, to repair this bridge? And the verdict that came back, over and over, across the centuries, was the same handful of words. No one is responsible for the repair of this bridge. The starkest case is Nottingham. In 1362, the great bridge over the Trent collapsed, the main crossing on the road to the north. Edward III, at the height of his reign, with France half conquered behind him, commissioned an inquiry to establish who was liable to rebuild it. The answer returned was simple. No one was obliged. The bridge had survived as long as it had on alms and on the proceeds of temporary pontage grants. And now it was down, and the King of England had no legal power to compel a single soul to raise it again. All he could do was try to restart the flow of charity, which he did, by granting timber from Sherwood Forest and hoping. Read that again. The most important pieces of economic infrastructure in the kingdom were at law, frequently ownerless liabilities. Everyone wanted the crossing. No one could be made to own the repair bill, and every private fortune that looked closely at the numbers reached the same conclusion. Neither can I. Here's a way to feel why. Imagine 2 brothers who each inherit an identical bridge on identical rivers with identical tolls. The first brother treats the toll as income. Every year he counts the coin at the gate, pays the small running costs, and takes the rest home. And for 10 years, maybe 20, he is visibly the richer man. The second brother treats the toll as a maintenance fund. Every coin goes into a chest marked for the bridge, and he lives off something else entirely. And his neighbors quietly think him a fool, because look at his brother. Then comes the winter both rivers were always going to send eventually. Ice takes an arch from each bridge on the same night. The second brother opens the chest, hires the masons, and is trading again by summer. The first brother discovers what he actually inherited, not an income, a debt with a variable due date, which has just come due, in a sum equal to everything he ever took out of the gate, payable immediately, to a river that does not negotiate. The two bridges were identical. The two businesses never were. One brother owned a bridge. The other was, without ever signing anything, borrowing from one. Medieval England watched that story play out on real rivers for 600 years, and the institutions it built are the moral of it. Because now, here's where the whole picture flips. The medieval world did solve this problem. It solved it twice, with two inventions, and neither of them is a toll. The first invention was salvation. The medieval church classed the building and repair of bridges as a work of mercy, the same moral category as feeding the hungry and sheltering the traveler. Bishops granted indulgences, remission of penance, to those who gave money or labor to a bridge. Chapels were built on the bridges themselves, staffed with priests, collecting offerings from every traveler who paused to pray for a safe crossing. Hermits took up station at bridgeheads to gather alms for repairs, and dying men, generation after generation, left money in their wills to the same two-word beneficiary that appears in the London records again and again, to God and the bridge. Stop and admire the financial engineering, because that's what it is. The one funding source that never expires, never floods, and never rules itself exempt is the human fear of death. The bridge trades eternity for masonry. Every arch is part paved with dead men's guilt, and unlike pontage, guilt is renewed with every generation, automatically, forever. London built this engine directly into the deck. At the center of the bridge stood a chapel, and not a modest one. The chapel of St. Thomas Becket was grander than many small-town parish churches, with its own river-level entrance, so that fishermen and boatmen could step in from the water. And the dedication was a masterstroke of what a modern analyst would have to call traffic capture. Becket had been born in the very parish where Peter de Colchurch was priest. He had been murdered and canonized within living memory, and his shrine at Canterbury was the greatest pilgrimage destination in England. The road to Canterbury ran across London Bridge, which meant every pilgrim in the kingdom's biggest devotional movement funneled over this one deck and paused at the midpoint of the crossing, at a chapel built to the exact saint they were traveling to venerate, with an offering box waiting. The bridge didn't just tax trade. It stood tollgate on the road to heaven, and the chapel clipped the traffic both ways. And behind the chapel stood something even more telling, the bridge house itself, a permanent maintenance establishment on the Southwark Bank, with its own yard, its own stores of stone and timber, its own staff and wardens, generation after generation. Pause on how strange that is for the Middle Ages. This is a standing engineering department, centuries before anyone had the phrase, kept in being, not to build anything, but purely to keep one structure alive forever. The medieval world did not maintain most things this way. It maintained this because it had learned, at the price of drowned arches, what the alternative cost. The purest case is Avignon. In 1177, so the story goes, a shepherd boy named Benezet walked down from the hills claiming heaven had commanded him to bridge the Rhône, at a spot where the current was so violent it had reportedly discouraged Roman engineers. The bishop laughed. The boy reputedly moved a stone no team of men could shift. The town stopped laughing, and the money poured in. Wealthy patrons formed a brotherhood around him, a bridge-building fraternity, to fund and maintain the work. What rose over the following years was staggering. 22 stone arches, over 900 meters, the only stone crossing of the Rhône between Lyon and the sea. The tolls on it helped make the fortune of Avignon. And notice what stood at the center of the project's finances. Not a lord, not a merchant syndicate, a saint's legend, and a religious brotherhood. The largest bridge in the region was, at its core, a miracle with a toll booth. The second invention was real estate, and this one is the quiet masterpiece. From the very beginning of the new London Bridge, there were houses on it, not as an afterthought. The records around its construction show plots on the bridge being granted out with the rents reserved for its upkeep, and historians note flatly that this was a normal way of paying for a bridge's maintenance. By 1358, there were 138 premises on London Bridge paying rent. In later centuries, the buildings rose 5 stories, shops below, dwellings above, walkways bridging overhead, until travelers crossing the Thames sometimes had no idea they were on a bridge at all. They thought they were on a street. And financially, that's exactly what it was. Think about what the bridge's operators had discovered. A toll is charged once, at a gate, to a resentful stranger under a legal ceiling, with a free ford upstream. A rent is charged monthly, to a tenant whose shop sits on the busiest street in England, a street where every single passerby has already been filtered for having business worth crossing a river for. The bridge deck was the best retail location in the kingdom, and the operators owned all of it. The toll crossed the water. The rent roll is what paid for the bridge. And behind the rents stood the third layer, the endowment. Londoners' bequests to God and the bridge didn't just buy stone. They bought land, houses, wharves, property across the city, vested in a standing body. The bridge house, with its wardens, its maintenance yard, its permanent staff. The gifts became an estate. The estate threw off income. The income repaired the bridge forever, whether or not a single toll was collected that year. Now stand back and look at what that structure actually is, because the medieval world has quietly inverted your entire business plan. The bridge is not the asset. The bridge is the liability, a permanent, river-facing hole into which money must be poured for eternity. The asset is the endowment wrapped around it. The rents, the lands, the bequests. You wanted to buy a toll stream. The people who actually made bridges work spent their whole design effort building the thing that feeds the bridge and treated the toll as loose change. And if you want proof that this is the right way to read it, medieval England ran the experiment for us, with a control group. In 1265, after the Battle of Evesham, custody of London Bridge was granted to Queen Eleanor, wife of Henry III. For 6 years, she enjoyed the bridge's rents and lands. That's the record's phrasing, enjoyed. The income flowed to the Queen. The maintenance did not flow to the bridge, which fell into disrepair, until in 1271, the bridge was restored to the citizens. Follow the timeline, 1 decade forward. In 1281, 5 arches of London Bridge collapsed into the Thames. Stone does that. It forgives neglect silently, year after year, and then presents the entire deferred bill in a single night. A bridge account can be looted for 6 years and look perfectly healthy at the gate the whole time, because the damage accumulates underwater, at the piers, out of sight, payable later, all at once, with interest. Contemporaries drew the connection between neglect of the warden's duty and the collapses, and the lesson prices itself. The most dangerous person in this industry is not the flood. It's an owner who can take the income without owning the consequence. Which brings us to the 2 endings of this story, one on the Rhone and one on the Thames, and between them, they close the case. First, the Rhone. The bridge at Avignon fought its river for 500 years, and the ledger of that fight reads like a slow defeat, partially destroyed in the siege of 1226, rebuilt, battered by flood after flood, arch by arch, repaired by the Brotherhood, again and again. Then in 1603, a flood took 1 arch, and in 1605, 3 more. It took over 20 years to even start the repairs. A plague interrupted the work, and the bridge finally reopened in 1633. 2 months later, the Rhone took 2 more arches, and in 1669 came the flood that ended the argument. Most of the remaining arches went down, and this time nobody rebuilt, for the plainest reason in this entire video, recorded in the town's own history. It was too expensive to maintain. The Rhone had outlasted the miracle, the Brotherhood, the tolls, and 5 centuries of piety. Today, 4 arches stand, reaching partway across the river and stopping in midair. And there is one last dry detail worth savoring. The broken bridge still earns money. Visitors now pay admission to walk out along the 4 arches to the exact point where the money ran out. The bridge that could not afford its river finally found the one revenue model, with no maintenance obligation attached, being a ruin. Now the Thames, and the other ending. In England, town after town eventually copied the London solution. At Rochester, where the old bridge had been failing with grim regularity, down for 24 weeks in 1339, so dangerous in 1361 that a ferry had to be hired, and largely carried away by ice and meltwater in the winter of 1380, two knights, John de Cobham and Robert Knowles, built a new stone bridge and then did the thing that mattered more than the bridge. In 1399, they obtained a royal patent creating a permanent body of wardens with the power to own property, and they endowed it with lands in Kent and Essex and London, whose rents would maintain the crossing. That body is called the Rochester Bridge Trust. It still exists. It still owns some of those medieval properties, and it has maintained a crossing at Rochester from its own income at no cost to the traveler for over 600 years. And London outdid even that. The old bridge, Peter de Colchurch's Bridge, was finally demolished in the 1830s after 6 centuries of service, replaced and replaced again. The endowment did not go down with it. The Bridge House estates, seated by those medieval bequests to God and the bridge, simply kept compounding through fires, plagues, and the demolition of the very structure it was created to serve. It exists today as one of the wealthiest charitable funds in Britain. It maintains 5 Thames bridges, toll-free, out of income, and its surplus is given away to charity across London. Read that ending again, slowly, because it settles the question we opened with. The asset outlived the bridge. The stones Peter de Colchurch sank into the Thames are gone without trace. The rent roll wrapped around them is still paying out 8 centuries later. If the bridge had been the business would have died in the 1830s. The endowment was the business. It never even noticed the demolition. So, does owning a medieval toll bridge work? Run the 2 years one last time, as the owner you wanted to be at the start. The good year. A dry spring keeps the river tame, and, better still, keeps it low, so the fords upstream turn to sucking mud, and every cart in the district has no choice but your gate. The summer fair runs a full week, and the tolls come in faster than the collector can ledger them. The rents from the houses on the deck arrive quarterly, quietly, in sums that dwarf the gate money, from tenants who would fight to keep their spot on the busiest street in the region. A rich widow of the town dies in October and leaves the bridge a meadow and 2 shops in her will, for the health of her soul, and the endowment grows without you lifting a finger. The masons find the piers sound at the autumn inspection. A bridge in a year like this is serene in a way almost no medieval business ever is, fed from 4 directions at once: tolls, rents, legacies, and land, while the river behaves. The bad year. It starts in February, at night, with a sound the whole town wakes to. Ice coming down the river in rafts and striking the cutwaters like siege engines. By morning, an arch is gone, and a gap of gray water stands where your road was. The tolls stop that same day, completely, because a bridge with a hole in it collects nothing, while a ferry appears within the week, run by an enterprising boatman who is now harvesting your customers at your own bank. Your pontage, it turns out, expired at Michaelmas, and the renewal is sitting in a pile of petitions at Westminster behind a war. The inquest you request into who is anciently bound to repair the crossing comes back with the verdict you already knew it would. No one is bound, and now you learn the true shape of the thing you own. Every week the gap stands open, trade reroutes, the ferry entrenches, the town grumbles, and the repair grows dearer as winter scour widens the wound underwater. The gap between these 2 years is not a good margin versus a thin one. It's an income versus an emergency, decided by ice in one night, with the law standing neutral on the bank. That gap is the reason this asset kept ending up in the hands of God, guilds, and trustees, and kept escaping from the hands of everyone who tried to hold it for profit, because the medieval world tested every ownership model on this asset. Kings tried obligation, and the juries said no one is bound. Queens tried extraction, and the arches fell. Businessmen tried tolls, and the ford upstream capped them, and the pontage expired underneath them. The models that survived, the only ones, were the models where the owner never intended to take the money out. A brotherhood, a chantry, a trust, an endowment feeding a liability forever. You wanted a tax on geography. What the river actually offers is a partnership on its own terms. It will deliver you every customer in the region, reliably, for centuries. And in exchange, it will present a repair bill of unknown size, on a date of its choosing, forever. And the law will hand that bill to whoever was unlucky enough to be called the owner. The medieval world looked at those terms and gave the bridge to God, not out of piety, out of arithmetic. He was the only owner with pockets deep enough, a time horizon long enough, and no intention of ever taking a penny out.